Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to Behaviour Under Stress. I am Bri Williams and I'm just keeping an eye on those joining us in case others are about to join us. So apologies if I seem a little distracted just at the start of our presentation. You'll see there is a chat box, so at any time that you wish to contact me, connect with me, just drop a message in the chat box that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And well, happy Friday. I've got a bit of construction going on next door, so it's always good to hear the tradies really pumping up the music for some ambient entertainment. So apologies if there's any sort of distortion at all. But we're here to talk about stress, aren't we? So that's just something that I'm having to deal with on this Friday afternoon. Now, I thought it was worth talking about behaviour under stress because of course, global circumstance. And I don't know where you are in the world. I'm in Melbourne, so we are, I was going to say enjoying, but we are enduring lockdown, the continuation of lockdown. So it's against that context that I really wanted to circle in on stress and talk a little bit about the impacts it's possibly having on our businesses, but certainly on us personally as well. So that's really what today is about. Now, there's a number of you live, and thank you for joining me live. There's also going to be people watching the recording as well. So I'm sure they will be pleased to hear any exchanges and any questions you have in mind, because you'll probably be echoing thoughts that they're having as well. Now, just so that we settle into today and get the most out of our time together, my question to you just to begin is, what's your level of focus right now? So, for instance, if one is, I'm not at all focused, I'm distracted, I'm eating lunch and I've got multiple tabs open and I'm playing with my phone, that might be a 1. Number 7 is I'm zoned in, Bri, I'm really hooked into this session and I can't wait for every word that comes out of your mouth. So in terms of how focused you are in this time together, in the chat box, just drop a number. Is it 1? Is it 7? Is it somewhere in between? So no judgment, just have a thought about how your focus is at the moment. Is everyone finding the chat box? For internet issues, that's difficult, Ange, isn't it? You can certainly drop, if you want to, try and reconnect. Yeah, that's really distracting. 5, same here, internet issues. It's okay from my perspective, I don't know what's going on outside of my Given those numbers and perhaps any reflection that you have on how focused you are, my next question to you is, if you were to change one thing in your environment to improve that score, what would you change? So is there something that you can do in terms of your focus? Does it I'm dropping in and out. This is modern technology at its best, isn't it? Sorry, I'm dropping in and out. We're going to soldier through, unfortunately. So the question was, what's your current level of focus? What's one thing you could do to improve that score? So for instance, the classic might be to put your phone in a room outside of where you are. You might be shutting down tabs. It might be making sure that your email is inaccessible to you. So what's one thing you can do in your environment to improve your focus so that this time together is as deliberate as possible for you? I'll just let you make any adjustments that you prefer in order to do that, and then we'll move into I didn't see the elephant. I saw the panic on the faces of the two women in front of me, and that was enough to tell me my life is in danger here. We're running for our lives. So this isn't the elephant, by the way. This is footage from someone else, because I was running for my life. And you know, in the movie when you see the person that falls down is the one that gets trodden on. Well, that was me. My panic was such that I was running for my life and my body failed me. So I found myself looking in the dirt, fleeing from what I really didn't know what sort of animal it was that we were fleeing from. But suddenly, stress was an understatement of the experiences I was having. Thankfully, we all got to safety. I'm here today. But that was the longest walk I've ever taken to get back to camp. I tell you what. So one stressful event was an elephant charge. Another stressful event that I experienced, unfortunately, was when I was on a university trip in Japan in 95, and we were staying in Kyoto, and we had a beautiful day there looking at things like the Golden Shrine, but then we're woken up to the Kobe earthquake, which was about 40 kilometres away. So the stress there was intense, but it was different. And I say it was different because with an earthquake, you can't run away from it. There is nowhere to run. So with an elephant, I knew where my stressor was and I could take evasive action. With an earthquake, the stress I felt was there's no way to escape this. There is no safety at all. So that was stress number 2. I think the lesson so far is don't go on holiday with me. The third is right here in Melbourne, and this was more an existential stress because I was working in the corporate sector. So this was, over 10 years ago. I've been in my business 10 years now. I was commuting into the city. People around me just looked so dismayed, and I was probably amongst them. No one looked entirely happy with their life, and I certainly didn't feel like I had job fit. I wasn't a match for the big corporation that I was working within. So I used that as an illustration of another sort of stress. It was prolonged, but really it was a decision I was making about how I wanted to live my life. So 3 scenarios in which I've had quite stressful environments, but all have been a little bit different. And I'm curious, again in the chat box, which of those illustrations, if any, has resonated with you and how perhaps you're feeling now. So is it the elephant? Is it the earthquake? Or is it more an existential stress that you're feeling? Is it a stress like an elephant where you can locate it and you can take evasive action? Is it an earthquake where you feel that you can't, that you're sort of stuck in an environment? Is it existential where there's no sort of immediate imposed threat, but there's just this gnawing at you about how you're feeling? So which resonates with you most? Is it an elephant? Is it an earthquake? Or is it existential? Just pop it in the chat box. I'd like to get a sense of how people are feeling about that. Existential? Yeah. Yeah, so the gnawing, the quiet, the perhaps the sense that I don't really know what this is about. The elephant, okay. Short term, then move on. Yeah, so there's a sort of a hit of immediate impact. Yeah, an earthquake, okay. Isn't it interesting? So they're all sort of conceptualizing stress in a slightly different way. And just with that in mind, again, with a scale of 1 to 7, how would you rate your stress right now, whether it's earthquake or existential or elephant? Is it a 1 where you're not stressed at all, or is it 7 where you're maxing out and feeling really, really stressed and anxious about things? So yeah, Justin, 3. Okay, 4 to 5, yeah. And we've probably noticed it can vary throughout the week, and it can vary throughout the day. For instance, whatever's going on. Okay, that's helpful to take a sense of where you are at the moment, because today, of course, our objective is to reduce a sense of stress, and particularly through the perspective of how we interrelate with others and how perhaps we control our own behaviour. So thank you for sharing that. Now, so when I'm thinking about stress, this is how I tend to map it, because I think the two essential ingredients that underpin stress, there's a couple. So I would say one of them is control. So it's sort of our sense of agency, how much we feel that we have agency in taking action, whether it's towards or away from the stressor. And the other element is certainty, or in this case, uncertainty. So we can have high control or low control, and we can have a highly uncertain environment or a low uncertain or more stable environment. So if I was plotting those 3 examples that I walked you through, for instance, high control, high uncertainty, this is where I'd really think about the elephant. I say high control because, just getting a message to my internet's a bit wobbly. I'm saying high control because with the elephant, it was pretty clear what I needed to do. I needed to remove myself from the threat. So I had agency over that, although my legs buckling, my body wasn't really supporting me in that action. But it was highly uncertain. We're in the middle of the Okavango Delta. We're on foot. We didn't have any way that we could really reduce our, we couldn't introduce more information to take the stress away. Whereas when we have a lower control environment, I'd really put the earthquake in here. Highly uncertain, because you don't know when the next earth tremor is going to happen. But low control, that was part of the challenge. There was nothing we could do as a group to remove ourselves from that situation. So we had low agency, low control. So a slightly different stress. Now, in terms of the existential, so the corporate environment that I described to you, I'd put that over here. I should say it's all subjective. So it was my subjective existential questioning of the job fit. I had high control in that because I could leave, which I of course did, and started my business People Patterns 10 years ago. So I had agency in that, but it was a very stable environment. So there was low uncertainty. So I sort of knew the lay of the land. Things were not precarious. That which leads us to another quadrant, and really not the subject of today, because we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty in our environment. But for instance, a low control, low uncertainty environment. An example that sort of came to mind for that would be something like you're sitting in your exams, for instance. They're stressful for sure. As a student, you don't really have agency in the fact that you have to do an exam, and it's not really uncertain. So there's a certainty in the fact that you'll have to do it. So that's where I'd sort of sit in exam. So this is really then a matrix that we can start to plot what sort of stress we're having, because then we can really dial into with whether this is more a control or is it a certainty issue, but how it plays out in business. So this is, in case you didn't jibe with my handwriting, this is just how the matrix sort of unfolds. But if you have a low control and low uncertainty environment, well, the stress there can become boredom or resentment. So you're feeling trapped, you can't really control the circumstance, and it's boring because there's not really much changing in that environment. In if we're now looking at the existential or the corporate experience, for instance, when there's a low uncertainty, so we know really what's going on, and that, I would say, predated COVID in a lot of senses. Well, the pressure there is to maintain the status quo within an organisation, for instance, or that tension between either maintaining the status quo or being a disruptor in that, because you have agency, so you can control, for instance, the disruption. But there's also no excuses because things are so stable. Now, in our environment, I'd argue that we're much more moving into this space. So if you are in a high control environment, which many of our politicians are in, they're in leadership roles, and you might also be in leadership roles within your organisation, well, there's a pressure to act without having answers. And so that can be stressful. And a weight of responsibility and recrimination if you get it wrong. So if you don't get it wrong because you had agency, why didn't you make a decision to act or to not act? Well, that's very stressful as well. And finally, in our earthquake zone, high uncertainty and low control, well, this is where we can feel lost or helpless, not sure what to do, and getting very frustrated with that, particularly if we don't feel that we have any agency over the circumstance. So that's how it sort of shakes out. So within an organisation, regardless of sort of the control or the certainty settings, stress can be present. I think at the moment, and you can reflect on this certainly, but I think it's more earthquake for me, certainly more earthquake, in that we can't escape from the prolonged sense of uncertainty and stress. And whilst we can control perhaps our little bubble of the world, it's very hard to feel that we have control beyond that. So that's sort of lay of the land. So now you can have dreams of earthquakes and elephants. I hope you don't. But today, really, because we can't control what's happening with the pandemic, we can't control regulatory settings. It's really about what can we control and how can we reduce uncertainty within our realm. And usually a massive source of uncertainty is people. And if we can reduce our uncertainty about how other people act, but also how we act, if we can reduce uncertainty, we can feel that we have more control over that, and that should alleviate sort of the stress that we might be holding in the current circumstances. Because I saw this quote from Sarita Bethia, I should say, and she is the head of behavioural science at Coca-Cola in the States. So behind every business problem to be solved, there is a human problem to be solved. And that really resonated with me and the work that I do, but also why we're here today, because really it's about the people side. It's the human elements within our organisations. A question though for you again is how is stress manifesting in your world? Now, manifesting, of course, can have all sorts of baggage. What I really mean is, how is stress presenting itself, either with your colleagues or within yourself? So how is stress showing up in your environment at the moment? So have a reflection on that. How is stress manifesting for you? And if you feel comfortable, please add it in the chat. So what are you noticing in your organisations or in your life? How is stress manifesting? Yeah, various ways. Yeah, it's a disconnection. Yeah, Fee, it's funny, isn't it? It shows up unexpectedly in different sort of ways under different guises. And it can be physiological. So for instance, chest feeling tight, sweating, interruption of sleep. feeling disconnected, having interpersonal issues. So, Ange, that would probably be more in the workplace than no accountability and frustration, I'd imagine. Yeah, yeah, and coming in waves for sure. Just when you think you're having a good day, something can change. Yeah, what I've been noticing with myself and certainly with my clients is that uh, we're getting a little bit sharp with each other. I was watching, my office has a window and I can see some of my neighbours, and a neighbour a neighbour over the road was having their lawnmower guy come and do the garden, and the woman who lives next door, who happens to be a teacher, she barreled out and she, marched up to him and she gave him what for. She really let him have it. And he was just doing his job, mowing someone's lawn. And she obviously wanted quiet because she was doing some work. And it's like, well, that's just anger, isn't it? It's anger that she's sitting on, and it's just manifesting itself in this eruption that she couldn't control. Now, had it been any other time of the week or, on a different day, she probably wouldn't have had that reaction. But yeah, stress can manifest in all sorts of different ways, but certainly with colleagues, and that's what we're sort of going to zone in on today in the session today, is really how do we get people on the same page and reduce those sort of hot state impacts so that we feel that we do have more control and less uncertainty. Yeah, so, and thank you for sharing. So one of the things I have in mind in terms of an observation I've made in the workplace is that you either get people being avoidant, so that might mean that they aren't replying to your meeting requests, or they might not be replying to emails, so it's like they've gone to the dark side of the moon. You can't get a hold of them. And then you've got, on the other end of the scale, you've probably got people that are angry and confrontational, and they're really coming at you, or they're coming at your colleagues, and it's rage filled and it's probably unnecessary. And then there seem to be people that, rather than either moving away from it and being avoidant or moving towards it, being confrontational, there's also some people, or it might be you on a particular day or at a particular hour, where there's inertia. It's almost that you get stuck in paralysis and you don't really know what to do, and so you kind of do nothing. And that might lead to procrastination and all sorts of things where you're just letting things get on top of you and you're really not moving one way or the other. So that is something I'm seeing, and this sort of maps back to the classic freeze response with and you've got a fight response here. So fight, flight, freeze. So we've got flight in the avoidant category. And I don't know if you've heard of the fourth of those, which is fawn, which is when people go out of their way to placate and that sort of thing, which I sort of see as a bit of avoidant behaviour, because they're really not processing the feelings or anything. It's really just a way to calm things down and avoid them. So that, I think, is happening in organisations and within individuals, which can be hard when you're trying to get work done, because they sort of fall into those categories. Now, why is this happening? Well, it's hard to go past Maslow, isn't it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I understand he didn't actually make the triangle, but is well known, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when our physiological and safety needs are under threat, which they are with this existential crisis of the pandemic, we go to those. They are the basic needs, and when they're under threat, we can't really look at any of the higher level needs or higher level functioning. So if we're seeing slippage, it's because people are not feeling secure. So a lot of financial insecurity at the moment, a lot of certainly health and well-being insecurity. So we can understand through Maslow's hierarchy of needs that it's very hard to get people to talk about the high-level objectives when really ourselves or our colleagues are really just grappling with the necessities of life. So I think Maslow is always worth reminding ourselves of. Now, what happens when these sorts of needs are under threat? So safety needs, physiological needs. In terms of the behavioural science, people really, I was going to say regress, but fall back to habits. So patterns that we're already familiar with. So a couple of studies here which I can point you to. So this was a 2019 Dutch study where they induced stress in people. So for instance, they got them to put their non-dominant hand in ice water, and then they had to do all this arithmetic, and they were videoed and were given negative feedback. It sounds absolutely awful. But what they were trying to do is put these people under a state of induced stress, and then they were given a task, a learning game, and they were given rewards for the answers they gave. What they found there was cortisol, so the stress hormone, that when cortisol floods our system, it diminishes the brain activity that's related to what they call goal-directed behaviour, so our flexible behaviour. And what we do is become more rigid, so we fall back on our habits, and that really is seen as the result of us wanting to save our cognitive effort for higher level tasks. So we revert to our habits, and likewise this American study was also on habits. What they did was take some MBA students, and in the period of time under which they were under exam pressure, so exam stress, they were interested in whether they stuck to their habits, so whether the habit was good or bad. So for instance, some people have a good habit of what they eat in the morning for breakfast, others don't. And what they really just found was that when we are under that sort of pressure, we revert to habits. So our self-control goes down when we are under stress, and our response is sticking to the knitting, sticking to what we know. How does this play out in the organisation? It means that you're kind of seeing people in their natural form, and that isn't always necessarily a good thing. In better times, it's almost like we put on our work persona and we leave the worst of ourselves to our friends and family. So we turn up to work and we're on our best behaviour. Now, under stress, and particularly because the lines between work and personal have blurred, because we're working in our homes, everything's blurred, and so we're seeing more of people revert to their known habits of behaviour. So if I'm used to writing an email in a particular way, if I'm used to talking to people in a particular way, even though I shouldn't, I'm going to, because I just want to get the work out there. I want to get it done. And this is very much in concert with us relying on what's known as heuristics. So heuristics are those rules of thumb that mean that we can operate through our day without thinking particularly intently on things. So heuristics like, you're either with me or you're against me. There's an in-group and an out-group. Now, it's natural for us to seek in-groups and out-groups. When we're not under stress, we're usually more aware of our tendency to discriminate on that basis, and we can exert more self-control to make sure that we are being inclusive. But when we're under stress, that falls away. The social niceties might fall away, and this is where we're getting, the heuristic of, these are my people, you're not one of my people, I'm going to look after my people. So it's very much an in-group and out-group. And within an organisation, that can play out as well. It's like, I like these people, I don't like these people. I'm going to, focus on particular groups. So in behavioural science, again, you might think of this, if you've come across the work of Daniel Kahneman or some of the work that I do, system one thinking. So it's, those fast decisions. It's the expedient decisions. What also happens as part of this is that empathy reduces, because again, if I'm focused on my own basic needs, my interest in others, my interest in others and the empathy with which I'm going to conceptualize the relationship is going to take a hit. And so we're going to be talking about empathy and how we reclaim that in just a minute. What else do I want to talk about? Just miscommunication. It's like when people are stressed, we're ships in the night. We're really not connecting. And you might have seen that a lot in the workplace, which then creates tension and miscommunication, the need to, redo work, whatever it happens to be. None of it's good. So with all of that, what can we do about it? So now I really want to talk about 3 strategies in order to behave better under stress. And the first I'm really going to be talking about is your self-empathy. So how can you really look at your own behavior and get in touch with that? Because when we think of empathy, often we jump to thinking of others, when in actual fact we need to understand ourselves better. So the first is, now this is where I have to really try and get creative. I'm going to call that a hot state. So that's when we might be angry. Believe it or not, that's meant to be a face. And then there's us in a cold state or a sort of neutral state. So hot state is, for instance, like my neighbour was. She was really emotional and angry, and so she took it out on the guy mowing the lawns. Her in a cold state where she was calm, she was collected, she wasn't riled up with these emotions, would have reacted particularly differently. So we toggle between these states. For instance, you've heard of hangry, I'm sure. So when you get angry when you're hungry, that could be a hot state. When, sexual arousal is a hot state. People cutting us off in traffic, hot state, all those sorts of things. So I think at the moment, many of us have a shorter leash. We have a shorter capacity. So we're jumping to hot state much faster. So one thing we have to know about ourselves is decisions that we make in either a hot state or a cold state can have a bearing on, the course of action that we follow. So if we're writing an email in a hot state, that email is going to have some fire on it. It's not necessarily going to land in a way that we might want it to, which is why, shelving the email or putting it in the metaphorical drawer for 24 hours to allow yourself to change state can be very helpful. So time travel is really important when it comes to hot state. There's also, I should say, in terms of empathy, there's also, and if you've been in any of my courses, you'll know this one. There's a version of yourself which is in the now, and then there's a version of yourself in the way distant future. So this is future me up here. This is now me right here. Now me likes good stuff. Now me wants to eat what I want. Now me wants to, buy shoes. And future me can worry about superannuation. Future me can worry about perhaps eating a salad rather than eating chocolate cake, for instance. And so we toggle between not only hot state and cold state, which is our sort of emotion, but also how we perceive ourselves. So now me is making decisions that are committing to future me to something. That can be a good thing. We can pre-commit future me to something. So for instance, investing in superannuation is committing my future self to saving money. But this is all part of our empathy game, because if we know that we toggle between hot state, cold state, and now me and future me, we then can take action to work with or overcome those tendencies. So for instance, I've already talked about pre-committing to a future outcome. You can also, it's very important to plan for the most exhausted version of yourself. So for instance, people often have grand plans. I'll join a gym in the days that we could, and then the gym happens to be 15 minutes in the opposite direction of where you're heading. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time when you're in a cold state and making the decision for future me. But now that you are tired, which is your hot state, you're tired, you're cranky, well, 15 minutes is just not going to be worth it's not worth going to the gym because it's 15 minutes out of the way. So planning for the most exhausted and frustrated version of yourself. So for instance, if you're setting up a project, we can get a little bit overly optimistic and ambitious about how much we're going to tackle because we might feel future me can nail it. Well, by the time future me rolls around, guess what? It's now me. Now me is stressed, frustrated, tired, cranky, what have you. So reducing those expectations. Other strategies to use if you're trying to get a handle on your own behaviour. For instance, you can add psychological distance, so asking for a friend. So if I'm making a decision, what would my friend tell me to do? Or pretend that you are giving advice to a friend about this issue. Because the benefit there is that it shifts you from your own hot state into a cold state and you have psychological distance. And so you can come up with a more reasoned and rational answer, typically. So really the objective here when you're trying to get a handle on your own behaviour is to try and come back to an equilibrium where you're rested, you're calm. So do things like that. Take a walk out of the room if you're finding that you're getting too caught up in something. Put a time delay in so that you don't fire off that email. So I'm going to call them, for instance, or I'm going to email that at a different time. And pretend it's not you in the circumstance so that you can provide that psychological distance. So that's your own self-empathy. That's really important. There's also another empathy which is for others, because part of the reason that we are getting, missing each other in terms of communication is we're too caught up in our own perspective. So this can be a helpful process to put yourselves in the shoes of someone else. So the first question to ask here, this is what I call my empathy map, is just to describe, I call them your customer, but it could be your colleague. It's just describe what you know about me. So it could be demographic information. That's difficult to say. So for instance, if I was trying to influence a sales manager, I would say, sales manager, he's in his mid-50s. He's been at the organisation for X number of years, what have you. Whatever you know about that person or what you think you know, that's where you would put it there, just to start to think about them. Then you would ask what problem am I trying to solve? Because this will force you into where's their head at? What's going on in their world? Because all of us are having problems that we're trying to solve. So my sales manager, for instance, might be looking to hit financial targets. So that's the problem that he's most interested in at the moment. So now it's starting to open up things for me because it's like, well, how is whatever I'm going to ask, how does that fit in with a problem that he might be trying to solve? Third question, how am I feeling about having this problem? Again, this is moving away from the problem itself, but how are they feeling about it? Are they irritated? Are they frustrated? Are they excited? So just try and think about their emotional state around having this problem. Now, if it's not someone you particularly know, so you might be doing it as a hypothetical for instance, a group of customers. So I'm trying to influence customers on my website, have a go at thinking, well, who are these people that I'm targeting? What problem am I trying to solve? Well, really, why are they searching for what your product happens to be? How are they feeling about having this problem? And then the fourth question, how will I feel when I solve this problem? How will I feel when I solve this problem? Because this is the payoff. This is the This is the removal of the pain point. So if we solve the problem that they were really getting irritated about or frustrated by or are excited by, how are they going to feel? Are they going to feel relieved? Are they going to feel excited? Because this is really getting to, there's going to be a good news story. When I'm talking to this person about whatever the topic is that I want to talk to them about, this is the payoff. And the fifth question is, who else cares about this problem? My writing's getting worse and worse. Must be getting close to being a doctor. Who else cares about this problem? We ask this because we don't live in a vacuum. So my sales manager, well, their manager's going to care about me resolving this problem. Or a partner, a wife, a husband, they will care because, for instance, the baggage that you're carrying at work, you're bringing into the home. So who else cares about it? Because this will help you think through not only influencing the person that you're trying to influence or the people, but who they have to influence, because they're going to have to talk to their decision, for instance, to do business with you or agree to something that you're asking. They're going to have to share that with others. So that question is really about getting into not only their headspace, but who around them is going to care about it. Just having Natalie join us. Natalie, hi. Welcome. You're a little bit, we're in the mix already, so see how you go in terms of catching up with us. Okay, so strategy number one, when we're trying to reduce not control, but work with stress, so certainty and control. We talked about empathy, with getting into your own state of mind, hot or cold, now or future. And we've just talked about the empathy mapping exercise or empathy gap, that to close that between you and the other people that you're trying to influence. Natalie, I'll just mute you. So all of this is about getting to the point of it's not just me that's involved here, and moving into a headspace which is either you in a different mindset or the person that you're trying to influence, their mindset. What do we do then? Well, it's about being clear on what our behavioural objective is. So now that we're thinking about ourselves or about the other people that we're influencing, we need to get crystal clear on, well, what do we actually want to see happen here? And our behavioural objective is as simple as, what are they currently doing? So what's A? What are they currently doing? So currently they're ignoring my emails, for instance. So that's current behaviour. And B is the desired behaviour. What do I want them to do? So B is, I want them to respond to my emails. So the behavioural objective, it's funny, we often go straight to B. I know what I want them to do, but we forget to ask, what are they doing instead? Because only by asking the two questions do we get a sense of, well, what's the gap here? What's the delta? I shouldn't say delta. What is the scale of the ask? Is this a small thing? Is this a big thing? A is they're not clicking a button. B is I want them to click a button, for instance. A is staff members are avoiding doing something. B is we want them to do something differently. So, for instance, they're not adhering to a policy, and B is we want them to adhere to a policy. So behavioural objective, it's quite straightforward, but that shouldn't belie how important it is. Because this all builds to then, now that we know about them and we're clear on what we want them to do, how do we do it? Well, we're going to work with the wiring that they come with. Now, this is all about, so we have A to B. This is my behavioural model. If you've come across that in any of our work together or work that you've come across with me, there are only 3 reasons people don't do what you want them to. They are lazy, and I don't say that in a pejorative sense. I say that in a, we like to think pretty superficially, use our system one, rely on our habits, cut to the chase, path of least resistance. So we're lazy from that perspective. So overwhelmed. Just fitted it in there. So overwhelmed. So too much going on. I'm confused. I don't know how to act. I don't know what to do. You're bombarding me. I'm overloaded. We talked about that when we were talking about stress. A typical state is overwhelm. It's all just too much. I don't have the clear path of what I'm meant to do. And the third reason people don't take action is that they are scared. So they're holding a level of anxiety around committing to the action. So as simple as if I want them to click a button, they're at A and they're not clicking a button, I want them to click a button. Why would they be scared? Well, if they don't know where the button is going to take them, if they think the button is going to commit them to a purchase that they're not ready to make, well, they're not going to do it. So these are the three barriers to getting people to do what we would like them to do and have exerting, I suppose, more agency over that. And this also gives us a sense of more certainty about how people are behaving, because we can really clarify, is the reason we're getting resistance, is it a lazy problem? Is it an overwhelm, or is it a fear-based problem? So going through those three layers can really help us zone in on what is or isn't at play, rather than feeling like behavior is spaghetti and I don't know where to take this. It helps us really zone in on it. The other beauty is that if you use this sort of thing with your team and you talk them through, okay, what's our behavioural objective with this project or this communication, for instance? Everyone gets super clear on the behavioural objective, so there's no miscommunication around that. And then you can work through what the problem is, but also start to deliver solutions. So what do I mean by lazy? That might be, why should they bother? Why should they bother doing what we're asking them to? A classic example of this is, for instance, writing an email and we're then ignoring us because they can't be bothered. That's because you haven't front-ended that email with a what's in it for me. Why should I? Why should I bother doing this? So, and you're making it too hard. You might have too much content in your email, for instance. Lazy brains, can't be bothered reading that, just a slab of text. So punctuating it with subheadings and bullet points so that it's easy to read, that reduces our sense of laziness. Overwhelm. Again, if we're using email as an example, if you're filling this email with you need to do this, but then you could do that, and then we're going to do this and blah, 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 people are going to get very confused as to what are you actually wanting me to do here? So being very clear about what the call to action is becomes super important. A lot of the pandemic communications have been confusing and resulting in overwhelm. People are running around with their tails. They don't really, chasing their tails, I should say. They don't really know what is expected of them. And scared. Why would people be scared of an email? Well, you might be asking them to commit to responding to you. They might feel out of their depth. They might feel like you're giving them more work to do. They might feel that they're going to be on the hook for a decision. All sorts of reasons people can be scared of even replying to an email, let alone any other circumstance. So these can help you work through what sort of problem am I going to have. Now, speaking of wiring, at the very start, if you were on the call, I ran through a few examples. So I just thought it would be cool to kind of just go through those. For instance, when I'm talking about wiring, this is really what I'm talking about. Particularly lazy thinking. So in both of these examples, you know, the logical thing is that a third of a pound burger is bigger than a quarter pounder, but people perceive 4 as bigger than 3, and so they miscalculate that. And the the fire alarm installed on, instead of the date, it's installed on the ceiling. So people can misinterpret instructions pretty easily. These couple of examples, when I first looked at that one on the left, I don't know if you guys saw it, but I totally thought it was a guy running in the snow, when in actual fact it's a dog. And on the right, it's an updater for classic visual illusion, but for a mask. So do you either see the old woman or do you see the young woman? So the old woman's eye and nose on a profile, and the young woman's eye over here, and the old lady's eye is actually her ear. Which is to say that we see patterns and we're very quick to process information, and we become certain of that information, even though that information is subject to perspective. And these are really about how we process information. So again, with this sign, I don't know if any of you fell for this, but what I totally did. So what if I told you read the top line wrong? I had to go back and go, oh, yes, what if told you. Because our brain is super fast and it runs ahead of really our conscious processing. We get the message before we get the message. And the beautiful example on the right, which is very much about how we can direct attention. So definitely you'll read this first, then you'll read this, then this one, and then you'll read this one at the end. So when I'm talking about wiring, that's sort of the backdrop of how people make decisions. Here's another one, particularly relevant for lazy, but you'll see these and they're known as desire paths. But we want people to walk on the paved path, but the path of least resistance is the one that people are actually using, even though there's a sign there now. So when I'm talking about reducing stress, I'm really talking about how we can use wiring, our own wiring, and an understanding of other people's wiring to advantage. I hope that's made sense. If you have questions, just pop them in the chat box, because I'm just about to bring this to a close. I hope it's been helpful. In fact, when I'm thinking about behavior under stress and it seemingly being unrelenting, when I think about stress, we started this discussion really talking about uncertainty and control. So when things are particularly uncertain and we don't feel we have control, we're going to be more stressed. But likewise, if things are certain and we do have control, that comes with baggage as well. At the moment, we can't really divine what's going to happen with the pandemic. We aren't always in positions of responsibility and can't always make decisions. More broadly for society, what we can do though is remove our uncertainty and improve our sense of control when it comes to managing our own behaviour and managing the behaviour of others. So empathy mapping. So think of yourself first as someone to get in touch with, but empathy map, put yourself in the perspective of the people or person you are trying to influence, because that will dramatically improve your ability to be successful in influence. So empathy mapping, behavioural objective, make sure that you're clear on what is the A, what is the B. Just by asking those sorts of questions for yourself before you write an email or before you hold a meeting or within a team environment, get everyone on the same page. And then the wiring. If I'm trying to get people from point A to point B, and knowing they are lazy, they are overwhelmed, and they are scared, as we all are, what can I do about each of those? How can I make them bother? How can I make it clear for them to know what to do? And how can I make them feel comfortable to proceed with what I'm asking of them? How do I reduce their fear? So if there aren't any questions, my final question to you is really, you gave me a rating earlier of where your stress levels are. I'd like you, if you can, given the ground we've covered in this short amount of time, rate your stress again. Do you feel that you have more skills around how you can... My internet's unstable, that's causing me stress. But your rating changed as we've talked through these strategies? So do you feel more certain about how you can influence others? Do you feel you have more agency or control over that? I'd be curious about if your rating has changed. Yeah, agency does certainly help. Cool. My final question to you is to ask, what is the one thing that you will do differently as a result of this? And you don't have to share this because we're just at time, but we started the whole session today talking about what's the one change you could make to improve your focus. My question to you to close out on, I should say, is what's one change you can take into your life so that you manage stress in a better way? If there's no fun, I'll stay on the line if there are final questions. Otherwise, thank you for joining me today. If you are a member of Just Do This or Influencing Action on my website, you get the recording as part of that. But otherwise, thank you. Enjoy your weekend. Try and do some deep breathing and other exercises to reduce stress. But yeah, I really appreciate you joining me today.